Do you go against a lot of people you're friendly with and respect as a lawyer? Like, what are the intricacies of how you deal with that?
So most of the time you're not really friends with them, like friends in terms of, like hanging out and, inviting them over to your home and that kind of thing. I will say that the best lawyers are very professional and nice to each other, even though you're on other sides. I worry way more about a defense lawyer who is entirely professional and courteous and even sounding kind. I'm way more worried about that person than I am about the defense lawyer who's pounding the table and ranting and raving and acting all huffy and puffy, because more often that's compensating for a lack of legal skill, a lack of the fact that the case facts, they're trying to make up for the fact that they have a bad case with being blustery and acting all tough. I'm way more worried about someone who's really nice and professional. But I also prefer that. It's really neat when lawyers approach each other like mutually respecting generals on a battlefield. You've probably seen movies or what have you where the general of one army has a lot of respect for the general of the other army. And they could even, meet somewhere and have tea in their war tent and talk to each other as, out of respect. And then they could mutually go back to their armies and go to war the next day. It's really neat when that happens in the law, and that's the way it should be. We're all doing the best we can for our clients. I think one of the things that might surprise people is even at the highest stakes, the highest levels of a case, you can still have that level of relationship respect with the opposing lawyer. I represented the class action case against MetLife, Metropolitan Life Insurance Company, one of the largest life insurance companies in the world. And we would go for dinner, opposing counsel from a firm called Morgan & Lewis. His name was Christopher Parlow. Incredible defense lawyer, very, very smart. Morgan, Lewis & Bockius is a firm of thousands of lawyers at the very top tier of lawyers. They have offices all over the world, and they are just incredibly well respected. And I would go, to New York. I would fly to New York to take depositions of, vice presidents and other executives of MetLife. And I would go for dinner with Chris Parlow, and we'd have a steak dinner, or we'd meet for lunch or whatever. And, we had a mutual respect for each other. In fact, we ended up settling that case for around, I think it was 6.5, give or take, $6.5 million. The first case, I ended up bringing a second case against MetLife. But the first case, we settled for around $6.5 million. On the third day of mediation, so it went 3 full days of mediation, and then the third day at 9 o'clock at night, it settled. But in the, like the night before, we'd go have dinner. But we hired a mediator from San Francisco, a very experienced mediator, who also flew to New York. I mean, these are, relatively high stakes cases, and yet you could have a relationship with opposing counsel out of, respect, and we liked each other. After that case was over, he offered me a job at Morgan Lewis, said, hey, if you would like to come over and join our firm, we'd love to have you. And I respectfully declined because I like working for people more than I like working for companies. But it was an incredibly flattering offer. I mean, that firm, hires the best of the best lawyers. So for him to offer that to me when the case was over was very flattering. And we've actually kept in touch over the years. I've I've reached out to him, and we've talked to each other, several times over the phone. Lawyers are real people. One of the things I remember about him in terms of like his interests, he every year would go to New Orleans to the jazz festival. I remember calling him, one day, and that's where he was, and he said, "Oh yeah, I come down here every year." He's a person. He's a very smart person, but he's also he's very cordial, very kind, and he's the type of lawyer I worry about way more than those blustering, ones that just want to shout and scream. And if your lawyer's shouting and screaming, find a new lawyer, because your lawyer's probably weak, even though he's acting tough. That's really my experience.
Even though you're obviously not like buddies with the opposing lawyer, it's like it's still totally okay to have dinner and stuff with them when you're going against them.
Sure, absolutely. What's the difference between going for dinner and chatting with them versus calling them on the phone? You're expected to talk to your opposing lawyer. Why can't you do it over a meal? Doesn't mean you're representing your client less. I believe that showing the opposing counsel that you feel entirely comfortable with walking into the lion's den, so to speak, with being present with them, shows a lack of fear that I think is a good message to send. It shows a confidence that is a good message to send. And it also, just showing them, hey, you're a human too. And when you have an opportunity to talk about things other than the case, they can also see your intellect, your problem-solving abilities, and maybe some of your bravery too. For example, I could talk to opposing counsel about some of the adventures that I've gone on. Being dropped off in the middle of the Arctic Circle by a float plane and having nothing but, my law partner and I with our backpacks on our back to have to make it 50 miles in 5 days through the Arctic wilderness in order to get to our extraction zone. Most people would never do that. And that's just one example of some of the, interesting adventures I've been on. I could tell stories like that to an opposing counsel, and they might just think, well, shit, if he's not afraid of being dropped in the middle of the Arctic Circle with a backpack, eaten by bears or wolves or whatever, and just having to survive, then I'm not going to expect him to get intimidated at the idea of going to trial. Most lawyers are terrified to go to trial. It is a daunting process. It's scary. Most lawyers that call themselves, I'm a personal injury lawyer, have never been to trial.
Never?
Never. In Santa Rosa, where my house is, although I've tried cases all throughout California, and I've handled cases all over the country, but primarily I've tried cases in Northern California. In Santa Rosa, the largest city in Northern California, there's really only a handful of lawyers that are known for being trial lawyers. You could shake a stick and hit a bunch of lawyers that are calling themselves personal injury lawyers, but they'll never go to trial. Maybe they'll file the case, maybe they'll do some of the preliminary stuff, but then they'll settle. And the insurance companies know, of course, they know who the real trial lawyers are, who will go to trial. And the real trial lawyers will generally get more money for their cases because the insurance company knows you'll take it to trial if they don't give you a fair offer. So it makes a huge difference. And I got on this track by saying trial is scary. I don't criticize those other lawyers for not wanting to go to trial. It's a scary thing to go to trial. And it costs a lot of money. You have to have resources to back up your case. You have to be willing to lose because any case can lose. You could end up with a bad jury. And knowing that You could work and work and work and work and work, and then you have to have the confidence to stand up before the jury and talk to them. And you have to have the confidence to cross-examine an expert witness on the other side. It could be an expert in neurology, could be an expert in biomechanical engineering, could be an expert in traffic collision reconstruction, and they're going to always know more about their field of expertise than you are as a lawyer, and somehow you've got to figure out how to cross-examine them and pick apart their opinions. And you've got to do the homework on that. You've got to become a mini expert in whatever those issues are, and you've got to be able to cross-examine them. And all of that requires an enormous amount of work and courage. And so I don't criticize lawyers for not wanting to go to trial. It's daunting.
How many times during your peak of working on cases have you been to trial a year?
Not very many cases per year, because trials only come up when one side or the other is making a mistake. In other words, if both sides are correctly evaluating a case, it should settle, right? Think about it. If the defense lawyer is evaluating the case and you're evaluating the case on the plaintiff's side, if you're in the same range, then it should settle. It's only when someone thinks that the case is worth way more and the other person thinks it's worth way less that it won't settle and it'll go to trial to sort it out. So someone's making a mistake generally if a case is being tried. Now, that usually means if you've got a good plaintiff lawyer and a good defense lawyer, that the case will settle before it goes to trial. Sometimes you need to take it right up to trial in order to figure out what the presentation would be at trial, and then it'll settle. For example, the case where I represented the family of a 4-year-old boy that was run over and killed in a crosswalk. That case settled shortly before trial because it had to be worked up all the way to expert witness depositions, which always happens very shortly before trial. And why is that important? Well, expert witness depositions are where you get to cross-examine the other side's experts, and that's where the strength or weakness of a case sometimes comes to light. And I was able to cross-examine the defense experts well enough in that case to show the defense lawyer and their insurance company that their case was weaker than they had previously thought. I was able to cross-examine those experts of theirs to the point where I made them look bad in their depositions. And the insurance company had to reevaluate the case. The defense lawyer had to reevaluate the case and go, we don't want to try this case. And so at that point, they paid $4.5 million to settle that case shortly before trial. So sometimes you have to go right up there in order for the facts to become more clear. But getting back to your original question, I've never actually looked at a calendar and figured out how many is the most cases I've tried in a year. Probably the most extreme thing that I did was 2 trials back to back. So when you're trying a case, let me back up. When your case is set for trial, it's usually set for trial with a whole bunch of other cases also set for trial because most cases settle. And so any given courtroom each week could have 3 or 4 or 5 cases all set for trial to start at the same time. And most of the time, they all settle. And the judge doesn't have any trials that week, unless maybe he's picking one up from another judge because they have a couple or whatever. But the bottom line is cases are usually stacked on top of each other because most cases settle. So I found myself in a wrongful death trial that was in a courtroom where I had a brain injury trial set to be tried, like a week later, or week or two. No, it was 2 weeks later. And my case didn't get started right away. My wrongful death trial didn't get started right away. And so it wasn't finished by the time the other trial was supposed to start. And so what happens is what's called trailing. Trailing is, you don't usually trail your own case. It's confusing. Let me try and explain it. If you're waiting for your trial's set to start on a Monday. If the trial from the previous 2 weeks ago is still going on, but it's getting close to being finished, maybe it's only got a few more days left, the judge will call you in and say, okay, I know you're supposed to start your trial on Monday, but there's already a trial going on in my courtroom, so you will trail. Just the way it sounds. You're basically behind that trial waiting for it to finish so you can start yours. That's what trailing is. You're usually waiting for someone else to finish their trial so you can start yours. In my case that time, the judge said, well, you're in this courtroom trying this case, and I see you're supposed to start trial on Monday in this courtroom on your next case, so you will trail. So I was trailing myself from one case to another. And it was awful, because preparing for a trial, I mean, I'm up till 12, 1, 2, 3 in the morning every single day for a long time to prepare for trial. It takes a lot of preparation. And then when you're in trial, you are doing trial during the day, and then in the evening you're preparing for the next day of trial. So again, staying up till midnight, 1, 2 in the morning. So I'd been doing this for like 2 weeks in one case, and then the other case didn't settle, so now I'm trailing that case behind this case, and yeah, they both went. So this case ended, jury verdict came back, and then this case started literally 2 days later. He's like, okay, we'll be picking a jury in your next case. And it's virtually unheard of. When I tell other trial lawyers that, they just look horrified, because they know how after any trial you need a break. Like, you need to just do nothing. You basically turn into a slug. And so I just literally went from one trial into the next. That's pretty rare. I've never heard of any other lawyer having to do that. I'm sure it's happened, but it's very rare. So usually I would say a couple cases would go to trial a year, not usually back to back.
How many trials do you think you've gone to overall?
I've never sat down to try and count. A couple dozen, I'm not sure. 25, 30, something like that. But the great majority of them, significant trials, not talking about 1 or 2 day type trials. Some trials last weeks. Yeah, and it may not seem like very many, 25, 30 trials over, 25 years, but it's actually quite a lot. And most lawyers never do any trials. A lot of lawyers, maybe do a handful in their career. So having done 25 to 30 is actually a pretty respectable number as a trial lawyer. For every trial, by the way, that does go, you've got many, many that went significantly through litigation and settled right before trial. Because the defense has the same fear, by the way, which is why it's great to show fearlessness. Because the defense doesn't have the same motivation to win as a plaintiff's lawyer, because when I win, I make money. It's the only way I make money is if I win. The defense lawyer gets paid by the hour, whether they win or lose. But if they lose too many times, the insurance company picks another defense lawyer. So it does affect their bottom line indirectly if they lose. Now, they can lose once in a while, and the insurance company will go, okay, you can't win them all. But if you lose big, or you lose too many times, the insurance company is probably going to pick new defense lawyers. So they don't like to lose either. And they get very nervous about losing big. So when they come up against a lawyer that has won big, it makes them a little extra nervous. So I was able to leverage some of my larger verdicts, like my $10 million verdict, to great advantage because defense lawyers became a little more hesitant to go to trial against me, because if I did to them what I did in that case, that would be catastrophic. Because if they, let's say they have $1 million insurance policy and they don't give it to me, and then I get a verdict for 10 million and the insurance company has to pay it, someone has a lot of answering to do as to why the insurance company just lost $9 million that they never had to lose. So when you've had some big verdicts, it really, really helps to encourage settlements that would otherwise be more difficult.